magnificent this country is and the freedoms it guarantees its people, including the freedom to succeed. So please, come to our aid now to help us defeat the present danger, China. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Congressman Chris Stewart. Congressman, could you come to my side, please? He's a three-term or four-term congressman from state of Utah. And actually, I did study your district as far as the Hindu Americans are concerned, so I had an exact count. Indian Americans total population is about 3,000, 2941. And
well, someone just had a baby.
42, okay. All right. And then you have a number of Hindu American voters. But he sent a message, but then actually appears in person, which was quite touching to me as a Hindu, because you see, it was until only 3 years ago, until we got the help from Steve Bannon and President Trump. The Hindu name itself, the Hindu word was not popular. So, you know, everybody would want to say Indian, they don't want to say Hindus, because we're just too polite. So, and we are 1.2 billion of us Hindus, and we should be very proud to be a Hindu. So here he sent a message, but then he appeared in person, where he felt a lot of commonality with Hindus. He has a great appreciation for Hinduism. So he will say a few words, but let's, first of all, just for this, let's give him a big, big round of applause. Let's also show how Hindus think of President Trump and Steve Bannon.
Good idea.
So here is Congressman Chris Stewart, and I'm going to ask him something, a total surprise to him, but like Steve Bannon, it took him only 2 seconds to agree to be to be the honorary chairman of Republican Hindu Coalition. So I want to tell a congressman here a little something, and maybe it'll take him only a second. So we have a congressional Hindu caucus, an official body.
Yes.
Yes! Okay, here we have Congressman Chris Stewart. Thank you.
All right, Steve, did I beat you? You did 2 seconds. I did it in less than that. And Shali, if I come back, will you have them hold up signs that say we love Congressman Chris Stewart?
You're just starting.
All right. So I'm only going to take a moment. As I was flying out this morning, I wrote a bunch of notes on 5 pieces of paper here. It's going to be way more than you guys want to hear about, but I do want to mention a couple things. First, as I look out over this audience, what a beautiful sight. Those of you, you wonderful women in the saris. That's a wonderful, beautiful, colorful thing. The men, you all look like me. We got to step our game. We got to do a little better than this, don't we? And as I look out, I've been looking at the sign at the back there, the National Indian American. That is a beautiful thing. Because you are proud to be Hindu, you're proud of your Indian heritage, just like I'm proud to be Mormon, to be LDS from Salt Lake City. But we are all Americans. That's the thing that we love and brings us here together today. And it turns out that we want to protect that, which is also why we're here today. And there's a threat, and there's emerging threats, and there's real threats, and there's some pretend threats that people talk about, but there's nothing more important than this thing we have here today with the growing threat of China. My perspective on this would be slightly different than many of the distinguished people sitting behind me. That is, I come out as a conversation from Washington, D.C. It's part... Is that a lot better?
Oh, yeah.
All right, I'm going to start all over again, all right?
Yeah!
Go ahead.
Okay, a slightly different perspective. I actually had a meeting this morning. I won't say I was with this week, a very senior minister from China. Again, I don't want to identify her because it's a private conversation, but you know what? She was angry. She was angry at President Trump. She was angry at me, by extension, many of the Republicans, and those of us who are willing to say, you have lied and cheated and stealed from us for a long time. Mm-hmm. And we shouldn't be doing it anymore. Some of our policies have been fairly naive, and I didn't say that to her, of course. But she wanted me to approach the president and try to change his minds on some things, and I just couldn't do that. From a military perspective, you don't know anything about me. I'm a former Air Force pilot. I proudly wear these wings. Like my new friend Steve behind me, the general behind me.
He's just being modest. Not only that, he holds a record of the fastest around the globe in an Air Force plane. Is correct?
Fastest nonstop flight around the world, yep.
Wow!
I actually hold 3 world records, but that's one of them. But I promise you, my time flying was a lot more fun than being in Congress. I used to be out flying, I go, I can't believe they pay me to do this. And I have never felt that way since I've been elected. But from a military perspective, and recognizing that China isn't an emerging threat, they are a present-day threat. In many ways, they are our peer. We've had this perception that they're near peers or something less than that. It's not true any longer. And when you consider the aggression that they've been willing to show, whether it's from the South China Sea, or as Mr. Gaffney said, the Belt Road Initiative, you go to Djibouti in the North Africa and see what their intentions are there. Go to many places in Asia, as I've had the opportunity to do more recently, South America as well.
Nepal.
And so whether it's you're talking strategically or diplomatically or militarily or from an intelligence perspective, I sit on the House Intelligence Committee as well. 2 things I want to mention that haven't been mentioned today, and I think they're worth at least highlighting. One of them is the repressive nature of this government and their incredible sophistication in controlling their own people. Something like 3 million Uyghurs in the western portion of the country who we know are in concentration camps, but there's, I think, a better example of how that can expand as they expand their safe cities and as they partner with some other nations and cities to bring that type of surveillance and repression home. A friend of mine that works in San Francisco, he works in IT. He was driving to work. He noticed that one of the interns, she's from China, she's a student here on a student visa, she was walking all the time. And so at the office one day he said, hey look, you know, I drive by you, I'm coming from the same place, I'd be happy to give you a ride. She says, no, I can't do that. And he asked why not, and she pointed to her Fitbit and she said, because if I don't get my steps, they know that back home and they'll withdraw my student visa because I'm required to walk a certain number of steps every day. Now imagine that, she's a student halfway around the world and she knows she's being monitored back home whether she's completing her steps. We had a demonstration where you could take an individual and without any knowledge at all who they were, put him in a Chinese city, and within 7 minutes they were able to identify him and apprehend him out of more than a billion people, as you know. Within 7 minutes with their technology of facial recognition that is on millions and millions of cameras throughout almost every major city, and in a few years throughout virtually every foot of China. And last thing I'll share with you. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I had a chance to sit down with President Xi. I was a member of a congressional delegation. There were 4 or 5 of us, some senators and some congressmen. And I had a chance to talk to him about this thing called the Thucydides trap. I'm sure you guys are familiar with it, which says if you have an emerging nation and then an established nation, that they will always come into conflict. And when you look at that over the last 500 years, about 80% of the time it's true. And I asked President Xi, I said, do you believe that? Do you think it's inevitable that the U.S. and that China would come into conflict, or can we avoid this? And he said, oh, no, of course we can avoid that. It's not inevitable at all. You had your sphere, we have our sphere, we have mutual.
It was published in 1999 by 2 senior colonels of the People's Liberation Army. It was the 50th anniversary when this book was published of the PRC, the People's Republics of China, being formed. And at the time, China had the 7th largest economy in the world. It was barely the size of 10% of the U.S. economy. And they were working on most favored nation status, or permanent trading relations with the United States, which was granted in the year 2000. At the same time, they began to implement the things in this book, Unrestricted Warfare. They began a program of intellectual property theft that, as some years, has reached $600 billion of theft. Regularly, it happens in the hundreds of billions of dollars annually. They began unfair trade practices and currency manipulation. They began to corrupt relationships, both with Wall Street, with industry, but also with the U.S. government. In fact, in 1999, there were serious revelations of things that had taken place just a couple of years earlier in the election where President Clinton was reelected, the 1996 presidential election. At the time, 58% of Americans felt that this was a major scandal and believed that China had infiltrated our political system. It was proven by foreign intercepts. We had intercepted through our intelligence agencies various foreign communications that documented an effort by the People's Republic of China to influence our election. There was $2.8 billion of dirty money returned by the Democrat national operations in debt traps, intellectual property theft, a compromised IT supply chain, including their efforts to overtake the 5G markets. They have foreign students infiltrating American universities, Confucius Institutes. They've been buying up assets in Hollywood with the idea of influencing American culture. They have the Belt and Road Initiative that they use to subvert nations surrounding them. There is a call internationally to de-Americanize the world and to remove the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. They have active spying operations and certainly a military buildup and various human rights violations. Now, the problem that I have, the greatest problem that I have with this, is the fact that China has been funded in large part by the American Wall Street. A good example of that is what happened, I think, in 2014 with Alibaba. Alibaba listed on the New York Stock Exchange the largest initial public offering in history, and they raised $25 billion, most of it American money. What the Americans received in return for their $25 billion were shares in a Cayman Islands corporation that were really called a variable interest entity. A variable interest entity is questionable if it's even legal in China, but they allowed it and received $25 billion. Now, that's just one example, but the problem is even the Hong Kong Stock Exchange turned down this initial public offering because they felt there was no transparency and no opportunity for corporate governance. And the accounting systems of China are not to U.S. standards. Right now, there are 156 companies listed that are Chinese listed on American stock exchanges, and there are 600 more companies listed over the counter. There's more than $1.2 trillion of market capitalization in these Chinese companies, of which 11 of them are entirely state-owned and state-controlled. Another 33 of them have massive Chinese ownership, 30% or more. All of them are subject to the People's Republic of China control, or the Chinese Communist Party. last year 33 Chinese companies raised $9.2 billion on American exchanges. When we talk about IPOs, initial public offerings, do we realize that $9.2 billion of our money last year went to Chinese companies, and 4 of the 10 largest initial public offerings offered were Chinese? That's more than any other nation, including the United States. They raised more money in the top 10 IPOs than we did for our own companies. Now, the problem is these Chinese companies can be tied to human rights violations, or our money could be used for a military buildup. They're oppressing religious minorities in China using money coming from Americans. So basically, this is unrestricted warfare. What do we do about it? Well, you're doing something now. Attending a Committee on the Present Danger briefing is a great step. But we have to educate all Americans to help offset the Wall Street and DC corruption that the Chinese have infiltrated us with. There's a new act called the Equitable Act that Senator Marco Rubio has put forward that would delist any companies from anywhere that fail to provide proper American accounting disclosure. Now, most companies will survive this, but Chinese companies won't. They do everything possible to prevent Americans actually looking at the books. There are even laws that prevent you going and looking at the books. Another thing we must do is we must look for alternative supply chains. Whether it's from India or Vietnam or Latin America, we need to build American goods in places where the countries don't want to see America destroyed. And we've got to crack down on intellectual property theft and hacking. And we've got to support the Trump administration efforts to hold China accountable. In my lifetime, President Trump is the first president that dared hold China accountable. And so we're very appreciative of that. If you want to learn more about the research that we do, we have a new episode in the Economic War Room. It's a TV show. It's offered on Blaze TV. You can see episode 41 will be released this coming Thursday, and it's titled Underwriting Our Adversary. And I go into detail. What I've given you is a 6-minute briefing on this, but we'll go into great detail in that episode. You can find out more at economicwarroom.com. So I think my time is up, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you today.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Okay, about her, maybe some don't, some other people, but she is a legend. She is the #1 insurance agent in the world. In New York Life. New York Life is the biggest anyway. So as a result, it goes into that. So I went to one of her ceremonies that looked like a Bollywood production, where they were actually celebrating her as the highest producer. So it was in Switzerland. So that looked like a full Bollywood production over there. So most of you can tell I like Bollywood. So anyway, a few things about her. When she came here, she did not speak English. She did not understand English too much.
To be here among Powerhouse, which, thank you. Thank you, Shelley. No, I'm absolutely honored to be sitting among you and also business owners and all our local community members. And Shelley, what can I say about Shelley? Shelley, when he puts his mind to anything, and since I've known him, he puts 100%. He does not sleep, by the way. I must say that I'm sure you must have experienced here when you get to know him a little more, then you would understand that. And I have experienced very well back in those days when there was 2011, when he asked me that, Jayshree, you're gonna be part of this cut foreign aid to Pakistan. And for that, he said, Jayshree, let's go to Capitol Hill. So I made a trip in these high heels and walking up and down on that Capitol Hills with him. I was tired, but not him. Trust me when I
was
say
in
that.
Beverly Hills.
Yeah. So I must say that he is absolutely amazing, and he does work tirelessly to make our life better. And I'm so proud to know him. And thank you so much for coming. I know it's weekend, and I'm just proud to know all of you, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, I think we are going to move to our next most important part of this evening, a discussion, a panel discussion with the owners, business owners in this area who were very heavily impacted by this Chinese invasion. And printed circuit boards, printed circuit board assembly, and I'm going to move to the to my seat there on the table, and we'll engage in this discussion. To put this in perspective again, in the late 90s, ABG started out in this sector, printed circuit boards and printed circuit board assemblies. We started out in 1979, 1980. So we were in that for about 20 years. And there are a lot of companies that came out of ABG, and they were entrepreneurs, and they started their own businesses. But there were a total of 250, like Joe